In 2006, the island of Sodor had more visitors and holidaymakers than ever. All the engines were very busy picking up the holidaymakers from random docks and showing them all of the sights of Sodor. One morning the fat controller came to see Thomas, who was having a shower. "Thomas," he said, "I would like you to go to Brandon Docks and pick up some holidaymakers and show them the sights of Sodor." "Yes, sir," said Thomas. "By the way, who will be looking after my branch line while I'm gone? Toby and Percy are too busy to do so. They can't be at two places at once, can they?" "You're right," said the fat controller. "That's why I've asked Daisy to run your branch line while you will be picking up the holidaymakers." "Yes, sir," said Thomas. He was very excited. Later, Thomas had picked up Annie and Clarabelle and taken them to the docks to pick up the holidaymakers. He was very looking forward to show them all the sights. "Get in quickly, please," he said. Just then, Gordon had arrived. "What are you doing here, Thomas?" he asked. "I'm picking up the holidaymakers," said Thomas. "Ha!" said Gordon. "The fat controller has made a mistake. You're too slow and unreliable to do it. I'm much faster than you are. I would show them all the sights much quicker than you would." "You wish, Gordon," said Thomas. "Ha, ha, ha, very funny," said Gordon. "You are a very irresponsible and impatient engine. Don't you remember when you left your guard behind at Elsbridge, and when you were taking 2 years ago that brass band to Lady Head's birthday party, and when you left the tuba player behind, and when you were taking that circus train?" "Oh yes, that thing," said Thomas. "Well," said Thomas, "that doesn't mean I will not be taking the holidaymakers." Then Thomas heard Clarabelle's door banging, and he thought all the passengers were on board, so he left. But not all the passengers were on board. Thomas had left some of them behind. The passengers were anxious. But luckily for them, Bertie the bus was there, and they had told him Thomas had left them behind. So Bertie took them with him and followed Thomas. Later, Thomas stopped at a red signal. Bertie the bus was approaching. He wanted to tell Thomas that he had left some of the passengers behind. Just then the signal showed green, and Thomas took off. "Silly tank engine," said Bertie. Clarabelle saw him and heard it, and she was shocked. "How does Bertie dare talking about Thomas like that?" she wondered. "Thomas isn't silly just because he stopped at the red signal and went on when the signal went green. That's not very nice to talk about him like that, is it, Annie?" "Yeah," agreed Annie. "That is not nice indeed." Bertie had to chase Thomas. The passengers were enjoying going fast. Later, Thomas had arrived at Black Lock. He stopped there and he wanted to leave as soon as possible, but the passengers wanted to look at it and they didn't want to leave at once already. "Oh well," said Thomas, "time to go now," he thought. Just then Gordon arrived. "Well, so you're visiting Misty Valley Branch Line, are you, Thomas?" he said. "And you're pulling a good strain, Gordon," said Thomas. "What is it? Is Henry taking your express again? Is he doing that so well that you're jealous?" "Ha ha ha, very funny," said Gordon. Just then Annie and Clarabelle's doors banged and Thomas thought the passengers had already gotten back, but he was mistaken. Some of the passengers were left behind, just like at Brandon Docks. "Now that does it," they grumbled. Soon Thomas had arrived at Cullen Castle. Some of the passengers did get off, and once again, just like at the Black Lock and at Brandon Docks, not all of them got back. and Thomas also didn't realize this. Then Thomas had arrived at Norrumby fishing village. Then Bertie the bus arrived. "Thomas," he said, "what are you doing?" "Me?" asked Thomas. "Why, I'm showing the visitors the signs of Sodor." "No," said Bertie, "I mean, why are you leaving your passengers behind? Don't you realize this? You didn't pick them all. Nobody is on board, either Annie or Clarabelle. I've brought you your passengers." "Cinders and ashes," groaned Thomas. "What a silly engine I am." "So," said Clarabelle, "when Bertie told Thomas he was a silly tank engine, he meant that Thomas has left the passengers behind." "Yes," said Bertie, "I indeed did. I wasn't insulting Thomas. I just wanted to tell him about his mistake." So Thomas picked up his passengers from Bertie the bus, and then reversed back to Black Lock and the castle. "I'm sorry, you guys," he said to the passengers. "It's all right," said the passengers. "We were enjoying the sights while you were away. Thanks for coming back for us." Thomas had realized what a bad mistake he had done. If he only had asked if all the passengers were on board at Brandon Dock, this would never have happened. Then Thomas brought them to Norrumby Beach. He was enjoying to see the beach and people eating ice cream and swimming there and riding donkeys. "Man, I wish we guys could stay here all day," he said. The passengers thought it was a wonderful idea. "Yes, Thomas," they said, "we will. That's a very good idea." "Yes," said Thomas, "who said we can't stay here all day?" Just then Gordon arrived. He was looking at Thomas's sightseers, eating ice creams, riding donkeys, swimming, and so on. "By eating ice creams, you guys won't see much of the things, will you?" he said. "It's better to see one place at a time than seeing all the places at once by hurrying," he said, and all the passengers agreed. Later, after Thomas had returned the passengers to Brandon Docks, and after he had returned to Knapford, the Fat Controller had praised him. He had heard about Thomas's mistake, but he wasn't mad at him because of that. "Well done, Thomas," he said. "Daisy has been working perfectly on your branch line, and you have been perfectly doing your task. Tomorrow, Lady Head and I are coming to visit Scarloy Railway, so I would like you to take us to the wharf. From there, Rusty will take us to where we are on our way." "Yes, sir," said Thomas. The next day, Thomas indeed took Lady Head and Sir Topham Hatt to the wharf. Rusty had been already there. "Oh, finally, you guys are here," he said to Thomas. "Yes, we are," said Thomas. "Why are you rushing so much?" "You look very happy, Rusty," said Thomas. "Yes, I am," said Rusty. "This morning I was taking some workmen on our railway, and they were putting up some signposts to tell the visitors which way will they get to which locations." "Interesting," said Thomas. "And where are you taking the hats, by the way?" "I'm taking them to the lake near Scarloy Station, and from there they guys are going to walk to the tea room station, and from there I will pick them and take them back here." "Wow," said Thomas. "That sounds exciting." "Yeah," said Rusty. "Man," said Thomas, "I wish I were a narrow gauge engine like you, Rusty." He said, "Yeah, interesting," said Rusty. "So you could visit these locations as well, eh?" "That's right," said Thomas. Later, Rusty had taken the hats to one of the signposts. "Well, Rusty," said the Fat Controller. We'll meet you at the tea room station. Goodbye, said Rusty, and he was on his way there. Later, Rusty had stopped at the tea room station, but neither Sir Topham, or Lady, or Stephen, or Bridget were there. That's funny, said Rusty. I thought they guys were supposed to be here. Maybe they guys are late or something. Later, Rusty had arrived at Scarloy Slate Quarry. Some campers were there. Excuse me, said Rusty. You guys haven't seen Sir Topham Hatt or his family, have you? No, said one of the campers. We don't have seen them. We haven't seen them, said one of the others. Say it correctly. Rusty was upset. Thanks anyway, he said. Later, Rusty saw some skiers. You guys haven't seen Sir Topham Hatt or his family, have you? No, replied one of the skiers. We don't have seen them. We haven't seen them, said one of the other skiers. Say it correctly. Later, Rusty had arrived at the coal yard. There were some fishermen. You guys haven't seen Sir Topham Hatt or his family, have you? He asked. No, said one of the fishermen. We don't have seen them. We haven't seen them, said one of the others. Say it correctly. Then Rusty realized something. What were the campers doing at the quarry? The fishermen at the coal yard? Not to mention those skiers on that hill. Oh my goodness, said Rusty. He remembered what he had done that day. He had been rushing the workmen and fuss. They were doing it all wrong. Oh my goodness, said Rusty. It's no wonder Sir Topham Hatt and his family have gone missing. They must have gone where they thought the tea room station was. That's because the workmen didn't have time to put it where it was supposed to be. Silly me, said Rusty. So he had returned to the place where the signpost was. And then he followed it carefully to the hill farm. And Sir Topham Hatt and his family were indeed there. Sir, he said, I'm sorry, this is all my fault. I've spoiled your day, haven't I? No, indeed, Rusty, said the Fat Controller. We didn't meet at the tea room station, but that doesn't matter. The children had a lovely day, playing with the animals in here. Thanks goodness, said Rusty. I must have done it all wrong. Shall I take you guys to the tea room station now? Or... No, said Sir Topham Hatt. We're fine. This will do. Now you can take us back to the wharf if you like. That's good, said Rusty. And indeed, Rusty had returned the hats to the wharf. Thanks you for a lovely day, Rusty, said Bridget. Now you can go home. Not yet, girl, said Rusty. I have a mistake to put right. You see those workmen there? Yeah, said Bridget. Well, said Rusty, I have to take them back to where they put the signpost wrong this morning because of me. And that's what he did. You guys, he said, I'm sorry I rushed you this morning so much. Now you guys can go and put it all right how it was supposed to be. Yeah, cheered the workmen. Later that day, Rusty met James at the transfer yard. He was telling him about what adventure he had finding Sir Topham Hatt and his family. So Thomas brought them to you, eh? Said James. Yes, said Rusty. Oh, you haven't done as big mistake as Thomas had, said James. Haven't I? Asked Rusty. No, said James. Yesterday, Thomas was picking up some holiday makers from random docks, and he was supposed to show them all the sights of Sodor. And you know what? What? Asked Rusty. So James went on. Thomas had left some of the holiday makers at Brandon Docks, then some at the Black Lock, and then some at Callan Castle, and Bertie the Bus had to pick them all and take them to Thomas for him. Oh my goodness, said Rusty. Yes, Thomas is a very, very irresponsible engine, said James. Shall I tell you a secret, Rusty? Yes, James, said Rusty. What is it? The Fat Controller has arranged for a photographer to visit our railway to make a photograph of one of us to put on a poster. Wow, said Rusty. That sounds exciting. Why? To bring more holiday makers, of course, said James. But I'm pretty sure it will not be Thomas, said James. I mean, if the photographer wanted to make a photo of an irresponsible engine, then I'd certainly suggest that Thomas would be on the billboard, and the two laughed. The next day, the photographer had arrived indeed. The Fat Controller had made an announcement. The photographer is going to make a photo of one of you guys and put it on a billboard, he said. James was very excited. That's probably going to be me, he said. The photographer was then choosing one of the engines to make the photo of. The engine I am taking the photo of will be Edward. James was very shocked. What? Him? Yes, James, said the Fat Controller, him. The photographer was about to make the photo of Edward when James stood up in front. James, said the Fat Controller, leave the shed at once. You will not be in the poster, so stop covering Edward to be on it instead of him. James was very cross. Why, Edward, he said, that's not fair. Soon, James was pulling a passenger train and there were lots and lots of posters on Sodor. Whenever James would pass one of them, he would say, Man, that's so unfair. Why can't I be in the poster? He said. That is so unfair. Well, James, said the driver. Well, James, said his driver, yesterday you told Rusty at the transfer yards that Thomas wouldn't be in the poster. And indeed he's not. So you were right about this. Yeah, said James. I was hoping it would be me. It's not fair, James grumbled to Thomas, Percy and Henry at Knapford Station that evening. Why does Edward get to be in the poster instead of me? Because, said Henry, Edward is gentle with his trucks and coaches. And, said Percy, unlike you, he doesn't mind doing dirty works, like pulling trucks. And if he does, then since when? Not to mention, added Thomas, he's always on time, he's never late, and if he is, then since when? Then the Fat Controller showed up. Thomas and James, he said, I would like you two and Edward to work at the coaling plant tomorrow. Yes, sir, said Thomas. James was very cross. With Edward, the poster engine, he said. Well, that does it. Do you have anything against him, James? Asked the Fat Controller. No, he doesn't, sir, said Thomas. James is just jealous because Edward is in the poster and he isn't. I see, said the Fat Controller. Well, what was I supposed to do? Was I supposed to tell him to make a photo of all the engines at once? No, sir, said Thomas. I don't think that would be possible. The next day, the three engines were working at the coaling plant. James thought this was his chance to improve himself. I'll show them I can be as gentle and on time as Edward, he said, and that I can be able to not mind doing dirty work. James was gentle with his trucks. because he wanted to show he is worth of being a poster engine. "Look, Thomas," he said after he had finished shunting his trucks. "Look how gentle have I been with my trucks. Like Edward." "But," said Thomas, "Edward has already left with his trucks," he teased. "I mean, you're not supposed to be here chatting with us. You're supposed to take your trucks and deliver the coal to all the stations on the island. And to all the coal hoppers as well, of course." "Oh, silly me," said James. "I nearly forgot." So James had been delivering his coal trucks all day. He was dirty, but he didn't mind that. Later, James met Henry at Maron Station. "Look, Henry," said James, "look how dirty I am." "Well," said Henry, "you're not fit for the poster, are you?" he said. "I mean, if you're expecting the photographer to make photo of you being dirty like that, then I don't think you're right. I mean, you're not fit to be seen." "Yet," said James. "After I'll deliver all of the coal, I'll go to the washdown to get washed." James went to the washdown. Edward had already been polished. "Look at me," he said. "It's no wonder the Fat Controller and the photographer wanted me to be the poster engine. Look how bright and shiny I am." James thought this really did it. "Damn it," he said. "Why can't I be the photo engine too, like Edward?" he said. Later that day, the Fat Controller had told Edward to pick up some children from Kildane Station and take them to Bluff's Cove. "With pleasure, sir," said Edward. James thought this was his chance, so he sneaked secretly onto Edward's line. "Maybe if I'll go there before him," he said, "maybe the photographer and the Fat Controller will change their mind and I will be on the poster after all." However, James didn't realize there was a red signal in front of him, and when he did, it was too late. But the thing is, Edward was on the same line as James. "Look out, James," he said. Edward didn't see James until it was too late, and then it happened. Edward had pushed James off the rails, and what happened next? James crashed into a poster ahead, but from the other side, and you know what was on the other side? That's right, there was the photo of Edward, and James had crashed into it, and his face was seen there instead of Edward's. Now that really is something. Edward's driver and fireman telephoned for help. Soon Thomas had brought Judy and Jerome, and Emily had brought the Fat Controller. The Fat Controller was very cross with James. "Edward," said the Fat Controller, "your cylinders are damaged, so you can't take the children to Bluff's Cove on your own," he said. This made Edward feel sad. "Excuse me, sir," said James. "Yes, James?" said the Fat Controller. James had to pluck up courage. "That was my fault. I wanted to be in the poster like Edward. So I stood up in front of him, and that's why this happened. I didn't know this would happen, I promise. And if I did, then since when? So, is it okay if I'll help Edward with taking the children to Bluff's Cove?" "Why, yes, James," said the Fat Controller. "It sure is. As soon as Judy and Jerome put you back on the rails." "So," said Thomas, "you are in the poster after all. But still with Edward's body, your face just replaced his." "It has," said James. "Wow, who would have thought of that? Soon Judy and Jerome had lifted James back on the rails. "You know what, Thomas?" said James. "What?" asked Thomas. "That reminds me of when Judy and Jerome did lift me back on the rails once, when I derailed at the cow field, remember?" "Yes," said Thomas. "I do. It was 22 years ago." "Yes," said James. "And as a reward I got my branch line with Annie and Clarabelle." "Yeah," said James. "Those were the times." Soon Edward and James had delivered the children to Bluff's Cove. "That's a very good engine," cheered the children. "No matter if he was in the poster or not. He took us here to Bluff's Cove, so thanks to him we can enjoy swimming here." "Yeah," cheered the children. James felt very proud. The next morning the Fat Controller came to Tidmouth Shed. "James," he said, "I would like you to go to the wharf to pick up a truck full of flour to take to Sodor Bakery. Tonight there will be a harvest festival, and I would like you to take the flour to the bakery to make cakes and breads and many food for the children." James was very excited. "By the way, because there is too many work at the wharf, and James can't do it on your own, I would like another engine to work there with him." James had an idea. He wanted to make Thomas a stock of laughing because of what had Thomas done the other day with the holiday makers. James thought Thomas would humiliate himself in front of the narrow-gauge engines. "Excuse me, sir," he said. "I'm sure Thomas wouldn't mind working at the wharf, would you, Thomas?" "Certainly not," said Thomas. "I mean, I don't mind working at the wharf, do I?" "Very well," said the Fat Controller. "In that case, Daisy will be working on your branch line and you will be working at the wharf. I would like you to shunt troublesome trucks in there." "Yes, sir," said Thomas, but secretly he wished he were chosen to take the truck of flour. When Thomas arrived at the wharf, the trucks there were very troublesome indeed. Thomas was used to trucks, but today the trucks were more rude and troublesome than ever. "Man, that does it," he said. "Why didn't the Fat Controller ask me to take that truck of flour? Why did he have to ask James? That's so unfair. I mean, James was teasing me about leaving those holiday makers behind. Does he think I left them there on purpose? I mean, I'm not teasing him about his mistakes in the past, are I?" Just then, James showed up. "Now, Thomas," he said, "before I'll take the flour to the bakery, I would like you to shunt that truck to me. It's already prepared. I need to take on coal and water before I'll leave." Thomas was upset. He was glad he wouldn't have to shunt those troublesome trucks now, but he didn't like James telling him what to do. "Bossy boiler," he said. "I mean, isn't it enough that the Fat Controller is telling me what to do? Why does even James have to do it? I mean, I don't have two bosses, do I?" Thomas was so cross that he wasn't concentrating himself, and he crashed into the flour truck. The door of the truck suddenly opened, and the flour started leaking. Then Thomas had an idea. "If I'll hide the truck, then Bossy Boiler will have to find it," he said. "And maybe he is going to find it wherever I'll hide it." So Thomas took off. Just then James arrived, and he could see Thomas was spraying flour near the rails. "Thomas," he said, "stop! You're wasting my flour. You were supposed to bring the truck to me, not do this." Thomas had arrived at the warehouse. I'll hide the truck here, he said, and we'll see if James will find it. Then Thomas had heard James's whistle. Oh no, said Thomas. James is going to find it here. I'll hide it somewhere else. Wherever Thomas would go, James would go there as well. That really does it. How does James know where I am? He said. I mean, someone's most likely telling him. How do they know? I mean, are they watching me? At last, James had already found Thomas resting in a shed. Thomas, he said, what have you done? I wanted to hide the truck to see if you can find it, James said. Thomas, by the way, how did you find me here? No, said James. I mean, look at this. You've been wasting the flour all over the wharf. Thomas looked around James. He hadn't seen the sprayed flour until now. Oh my goodness, he said. It's no wonder you found me. That's right. Thanks a lot, you idiot, said James. Now the Fed controller is going to be cross with me, and it's all your fault. You were supposed to shunt that truck to me, not just hide it somewhere so I wouldn't be able to do what the Fed controller has asked me. Thomas felt very guilty. He had left the wharf thinking about what would the Fed controller say. Oh my goodness, I'm a very irresponsible engine, are I? First, I didn't deliver all the holiday makers to their destination. I left them at Brandon Docks. What a silly engine I am. Then Thomas had an idea. Maybe there is one flour truck, at least at the flour mill, he said. I'll go and find it. When Thomas arrived at the flour mill, he found it was closed. Dusty Dave the miller was there. Hello, Thomas, he said. What are you doing here? Oh, thank goodness you're here, Dusty, said Thomas. Listen, I need your help. I accidentally sprayed all flour from James's truck and, well, I was hoping there is more flour in here. Oh yes, said Dusty Dave the miller. There is only one truck of flour in here, but I don't know where exactly. Thomas looked at the shunting yard near the flour mill. There were lots of trucks, and only one of them was full of flour. I won't find that truck on my own, he said, but maybe James will help me. Thomas had arrived back at the wharf. James was still there, and he was furious. Now, what have you come for now? He said, to get me into more trouble than you already have? No, James, said Thomas. I know how to solve this problem, but I need your help. You do? Asked James. What is it? Follow me, said Thomas, and I'll explain it to you. I would like you to go to Sodar Flour Mill with me, because Dusty Dave the miller told me there was one truck full of flour. So I would like you to help me find it. Yes, said James. Of course I will. And indeed, soon James had found the truck full of flour, and finally he was able to deliver it to the bakery. Thanks, Thomas, said James. By the way, I'm sorry I called you idiot at the wharf. Don't be, said Thomas. I deserved it. I mean, if I hadn't been acting like that in the first place, you wouldn't have to call me that. Later, after all the food was baked, James had picked it up and taken it to the festival. All the children were happy. Man, said Thomas, I can't believe it. I got you out of the trouble I put you in. Yeah, said James. By the way, said Thomas, you don't think the narrow gauge engines are going to find out about that sprayed flour at the wharf, do you? Search me, said James. But unfortunately to Thomas, the engines did know about it. The engines of the narrow gauge railway were talking about the sprayed flour at the wharf. Was it whose fault was it again? Asked Sir Handel. Thomas's? Yes, said Snarloy. Thomas was careless, and he bumped into the truck, and the flour suddenly started leaking. The narrow gauge trucks heard that. Oh my goodness, they said to each other. There was the wasted flour at the wharf. Man, that Thomas sure knows how to make us laugh, doesn't he? Tell you what, said one of the narrow gauge trucks. Let's make sure it's going to happen again. I wish I saw it when it happens again. Even though Thomas had helped James to get him out of trouble, James still wanted to humiliate Thomas in front of as many engines as possible. He was thinking about how to do it. His chance came sooner than expected. He met Percy on a siding. Hello, James, said Percy. Did you hear that? Tomorrow there will be a football match day. Wow, said James. I have heard of that. Every year the Fat Controller chooses one of his engines to pick up the team and take them to Meron Football Club. Yes, said Percy. Whoever finishes their duties first will be chosen to pick the team. James had an idea. Say, Percy, you wouldn't mind doing my tomorrow's job for me, would you? Why? Asked Percy. Let's just say, said James, that if I were quicker than Thomas, then I'd pick up the team before him, and you know what? But James, said Percy, if you're purposely trying to make your duties done quicker, that means you're cheating. No, I'm not, said James. I'm just asking someone to do it for me. Well, James, suit you, said Percy. The next day the Fat Controller came to Tidmouth Sheds. Today, as you all know, he said, is a football match day. Whoever finishes their jobs first will be chosen to pick up the team. Excuse me, sir, said James. Yes, James? Asked the Fat Controller. Which station are we going to pick the team from? I don't know yet, said the Fat Controller. Whoever finishes their jobs first will go to Knapford Station to report it, and I will then tell them where to pick the team from. James was very excited. Last year he had pulled the Sodor team, and this year he wanted to pull them again. Thomas was hoping he would be chosen. Then Thomas had left to do his day's jobs, and James then talked to Percy. Don't forget, Percy, said James, because you're not that busy today, you can do my duties for me. Yes, James, said Percy. But you will do me a favor for that, won't you? Yes, what's that? Asked James. Tonight you will take the mail for me. Okay, said James. Later, Thomas had arrived at Sodor Fuel Depot. He had already finished his jobs when suddenly he saw James. James, he said, what are you doing here? I've already finished my duties, said James. So the Fat Controller had told me I could pick up the team. But I don't understand, said Thomas. I mean, let's just say, said James, that I didn't have that much duties. But that means it's not fair, said Thomas. Oh yes, it is completely fair, said James. Thomas was very embarrassed. He wanted to pull the team. Thomas wanted James to change his mind. They soon came to a red signal. "James," said Thomas, "are you sure you want to wear the white and green flags? I mean, they don't suit your red coat." "Of course not," said James. "I like wearing these, and besides, do you know how difficult was it to my driver and fireman to put it on?" "That's their problem," said Thomas. "Nobody forced them to put it on you. I mean, they could have put it on me. I mean my driver and fireman, not yours, of course." But James still didn't want to do it. Soon Thomas and James came to a canal. James was admiring his beautiful red coat as well as the flags. Thomas could see them in the ocean. "Say, James," said Thomas, "you wouldn't mind if I wore those flags instead of you, would you? I mean, they don't suit, they don't match your red coat." And you know what the joke was? Thomas meant that James's red coat and the green and white flags didn't look the same. The joke was that it wouldn't match his blue coat either. Thomas had had enough, and so did James. Later, James met Percy along the way. "Thanks for doing all the duties for me, Percy," said James. Thomas had heard it. "Wait a minute," he said. "So that's why James had finished his duties before me. He had asked Percy to do it for him. That does it," he said. "James," he said to the big red engine. "Yes, Thomas?" asked James. "You are nothing but a big, red cheater." This made James insulted. "How dare you speaking to me like that?" he said. "It's no wonder your duties were done before. I'll tell the Fat Controller you were cheating." James was very embarrassed. So embarrassed that he wanted to tell Thomas something that would make him mad. He was thinking about what to tell him, and then he thought of it. "And you know, the other day when I told the Fat Controller you would work at the wharf with me, it was because I wanted you to do something wrong and to humiliate you in front of the narrow gauge engines. That's why." Thomas was very cross. "That does it," he said. "So you didn't want me to work at the wharf? You wanted me to get humiliated." Thomas was very mad at James, so mad that he wanted to get back at him. He came to the nearest signal box. He was going to play a trick on James. There was a little passing loop that led to a forest nearby. The track was very old and overgrown with trees. Thomas wanted to pay James back for what he had done to him. "Mr. Signalman," said Thomas. "Yes, Thomas?" asked the signalman. "You must change the points, the ones that are behind me." "If you say so, Thomas," said the signalman, and he changed them just before James had passed. James had gone onto the side. "Hey, what am I doing on this line?" he wondered. When James just submerged from the other side of the forest, his white and green flags were all torn up. "That does it," said James. "What on earth have I done to deserve this?" Thomas looked at him. He wanted to pay him back, but he didn't want this to happen. "Oh dear," he said. "What have I done?" "What do you mean, what have I done?" said James. "Don't tell me this was your fault, Thomas." "Yes, it was," said Thomas. "But you silly little engine," said James. "So you were jealous that I was chosen to pick up the team instead of you. Now look what you've done." Thomas felt very embarrassed. Thomas was feeling very guilty. He had only wanted to pay James back, not to destroy the flags. "Oh dear, what a silly engine I am," he said to himself. Then Thomas saw Bertie the bus. Bertie had broken down. He was carrying the team to the station where James would pick them up. Bertie was very happy when he saw Thomas. "Thomas," he said, "thank goodness you're here. I'm broken down. Say, could you take these children for me, please?" "Of course, Bertie," said Thomas, "but I'm not wearing those flags like James is." "That doesn't matter, Thomas," said Bertie. "Not to mention," continued Thomas, "the flags that James is wearing are torn up." Then Bertie had an idea. "But the children are also holding the white and green flags. Would you like to wear these instead of those?" "Yes," agreed Thomas. So he went to the yard to pick up Annie and Clarabelle. Thomas's coaches were surprised. "Hey, Thomas, what are you doing here?" "I'll tell you guys on the way," said Thomas. "We must pick up the children." "But we thought James was to pick them up," said Annie. "Yeah," agreed Clarabelle. "He was," said Thomas, "because he had finished his duties before me." "Well, he hadn't. He was cheating," said Thomas. Annie and Clarabelle could not believe it. Thomas had explained to them on the way. Then they came to pick up Bertie's passengers, by which I mean the team. And then Thomas had taken them to James so that they could decorate him with their flags instead of those torn up. And then the two engines came to Maron Football Club. Everyone was enjoying the football game. "Thanks for helping me, Thomas," said James. "And you were right, I was cheating." "Well," said Thomas. "Now you see, James," said Thomas, "that it's no good to cheat. I mean, just because you want to be chosen instead of me." All the fans were enjoying the game. The Fat Controller was amongst them, but he didn't like how they were shouting and yelling over each other whenever one of the teams would score. "Hooray!" they all shouted together. It made the Fat Controller's ears ache. The Fat Controller didn't like it at all, and when they yelled up again, he lost his patience and shouted out loud, "Will you guys shut up, you?" The fans were very embarrassed. The Fat Controller was so mad of them yelling and screaming and shouting over each other that he had sworn. And now the Fat Controller suddenly couldn't speak. He had lost his voice from shouting at them. The Fat Controller had quickly left. The fans had never thought before that the Fat Controller can swear on the football match. Because the Fat Controller had lost his voice, he couldn't run the railway now, could he? So he went home and had written a list to his wife that he can speak and that she needs to run the railway for him, and to tell the engines what are their jobs. Lady had read the list, and the next morning she went to Tidmouth Shed. Percy was there, and he was very surprised. "Hello, Percy," said Lady Hat. "My husband has lost his voice." "Oh dear," groaned Percy. "How did it happen to him?" "Yesterday he was on the football match, and everyone was shouting so much that it made his ears ache, and he lost his patience and shouted at all of them to calm down. Anyway," said Lady Hat, "you are to run the railway until the Fat Controller returns. So, I want you to tell these engines what are they supposed to do. Gordon must take the china clay from Knapford to Brandon Docks. He must go slowly," she said. Gordon, slow coach, said Percy. Then, Lady had continued, James is to shunt some coal trucks at the coaling plant. He must be as busy as a bee, she said. James, busy bee, said Percy. And lastly, Toby. He and Henrietta are to go to Mainway to pick up some tourists and take them to Callan Castle. They must go as quickly as Gordon's express. Yes, said Percy. Toby, Gordon's express. And that's all, said Ladyhead. But what about the other engines on this railway? He asked. I have tasks for them as well, that I will give to them, said Ladyhead. Now, Percy, you are the controller for the day, until the fat controller finds his voice. Yes, ma'am, said Percy. Just then Thomas had arrived. Guess what, Thomas, said Percy. I am going to be the controller for today. Wow, said Thomas. Say, Percy, don't you need any help? No, Thomas, said Percy. Controllers don't need help, and if they do, then since when? By the way, said Thomas, have you heard how did the fat controller lose his voice? Yes, said Percy. Yesterday he was at the football match and he swore and shouted at the fans, yelling at each other. Yeah, said Thomas. If it was so noisy to him, why did he enter at all? Yeah, agreed Percy. Soon Percy had arrived at Knapford Station. Gordon was there. Gordon, he said, you are to pull slow coaches. What? Me? Said Gordon. Since when? Because, said Percy, the fat controller has lost his voice, and thus I'm running this railway today. What? Said Gordon. Who told you that? Ladyhead, of course, said Percy. But who will be taking my express? Asked Gordon. Toby will, said Percy. What? That's impossible. Toby is just a steam tram. He can't pull the express. Why are you telling me? Asked Percy. That's what Ladyhead told me, at least I think. Then Percy came to a washdown at Kelsthorpe Road. James was there, being polished. James, said Percy, you are to be a busy bee. What? You can't mean that, said James. Why? Because I'm a controller, said Percy. Since when? Asked James. Today, the fat controller is not running this railway because he has lost his voice, said Percy. Lady has told me. But why would she tell you to tell me to get painted black and yellow? Is that really what you meant? Yes, it is, said Percy. If the fat controller had written so, and if she had said so, then it is, as I said. James was very cross. And lastly, Percy had arrived at Arlesdale End. Toby was there. Hello, Toby, said Percy. Today you must pull Gordon's express. Why? Asked Toby. It's your job, said Percy. Toby was surprised. Since when? Today, said Percy. I'm the controller of this railway. No, you're not, said Toby. You're making it up. I'm not making it up, Toby, said Percy. The fat controller has lost his voice, and thus he can't run this railway. Which means you have to pull Gordon's express for him. Ladyhead has told me. Toby was upset. James had gone to the steamworks, and when Victor was there, he asked him what he was doing there. Hello, James, he said. How can I help you? Paint me yellow and black, he said. You mean to make you look like a bee? Asked Victor. Yes, said James. Percy told me I was to get painted yellow and black like a bee. Victor thought that was very ridiculous. But what was he supposed to do? Later, Percy stopped on Knapford Iron Bridge. in order to check how the engines are doing. Gordon was pulling those slow coaches as Percy had told him. When the children looked at him, they couldn't help laughing, and not to mention when they saw Toby pulling Gordon's Express, and James being painted black and yellow. They thought James looked very funny indeed. Hey, look at it. What is this? Is it a combination of a bee and an engine's DNA? Yeah, they joked. They were just metaphorical. James was feeling very hurt. Oh dear, I have screwed it all up. Oh my goodness, said Percy. Just then Thomas had arrived. He could see Percy was looking sad. What's the matter? He asked. All the engines are doing the wrong job, said Percy, and it's all my fault. Help me, Thomas. But you said controllers didn't need help, said Thomas. Remember? Yeah, I was wrong, said Percy. They do. Please, Thomas, be a pal. Help me. Of course I will, said Thomas. You need to concentrate on what Lady Hat has told you this morning. You must remember it. Soon, Thomas and Percy had arrived at Knapford Station. There were boxes of china clay that was needed to be delivered to Brandon Docks. Then Percy suddenly remembered. Slow coaches, he said. Yes! Not to pull slow coaches. Gordon must deliver the china clay to Brandon Docks, and he must go as slow coach. Yes, said Thomas. You must go and tell him now. But I'm afraid they wouldn't inform Gordon about that, because Gordon soon got himself in a bad situation. James had been racing along the main line in order to escape from the people who were laughing at him. Whenever somebody would see him, they would say, "Oh look, is it a bee painted like an engine?" Or vice versa. "Look, everyone, it's somebody took an engine's DNA and a bee's DNA and mixed it." They joked and laughed. James was very insulted. He wanted to run away from them as quickly as possible. He was running so quickly, he missed a red signal in front of him. Gordon was on the same track as James. When James saw Gordon, it was too late. James had bumped into him, and they both came off the rails. Soon, Thomas and Percy had arrived there. "Oh my goodness," said Percy. "What has happened to you guys?" "You're asking me what has happened, Percy?" asked James. "This is all your fault." "Yes, it is," said Percy. Then he came to talk to Gordon. "I'm sorry, Gordon," he said. "I gave you a wrong job. You were not supposed to be pulling slow coaches. You were supposed to pull trucks from Knapford to Brandon Docks. You were supposed to carry china clay, and you were to go slow as a slow coach." Gordon was very relieved. "Phew," he said. "And James?" "Yes, Percy? You were not meant to be painted black and yellow. I have just remembered. You are to shunt coal trucks at the coaling plant, and you must be as busy as a bee." James was very relieved. Soon Thomas had brought Judy and Jerome, and they lifted both Gordon and James back on the rails. Finally, both engines were back on the rails. "Man," said Judy, "you guys are sure heavy." "Yeah," said Jerome. "The Fat Controller could order a new breakdown crane to this railway to help us with lifting derailed engines." "Yes," said Thomas. "The other day I heard him talking about ordering a new crane on this railway. He said he was bringing some, but he didn't tell whom was he ordering, or never mind," said Thomas. "What else haven't you fixed, Percy?" "I just remembered," said Percy. "Toby is still pulling Gordon's express. I must go and tell him what job is he supposed to do." Then Thomas and Percy came to Maidway Station. There were those tourists that were meant to go to Callan Castle. They had been waiting there for hours, and they were very impatient. Then Percy suddenly remembered. "Toby is supposed to take these tourists to Callan Castle. He must go as fast as Gordon's express." "You see, Percy," said Thomas, "you finally got it all right." While Percy had gone to inform Toby about what was he supposed to do for real, James had gone to the steamworks to have his black and yellow paint removed, so that they could give him back his red coat. And when the red coat was back, James had gone to the coaling plant to shunt trucks. And soon the Fat Controller had already found his voice, and had gone to Tidmouth Shed to praise Percy for running the railway for him. "Well done, Percy," he said. "I am so grateful that you managed it without me, and I hope you, sir, will never lose your voice again," said Percy. The Fat Controller smiled. The next morning the Fat Controller came to Tidmouth Shed. "Thomas and James," he said, "today you two must go to the wharf to work with the narrow gauge engines," he said. "Yes, sir," said the two engines. The narrow gauge trucks still remembered how the other day Thomas had spilled the flour, and they wanted to have it happen again. Scarloy had been told by Mr. Percival to pick up the flour from there. After Thomas and James had arrived, Scarloy arrived to pick those trucks. The trucks were purposely holding him in there. Hold back," they laughed at each other. "Hold back." A crane nearby was lifting some pipes, and then it happened. The crane operator suddenly didn't concentrate, and the pipes fell on the ground. Scarloy jumped. He jumped so much that he bumped the trucks, and the flour fell down from them. "Oh dear," groaned Scarloy. "I hope I didn't spill the flour." "Yes, you did," said Thomas. "That reminds me of how I did it the other day." "Yes," said the trucks. "We wanted to improvise it after you, Thomas." "Wait a minute," said Thomas. "You guys did it on purpose?" "Yeah," laughed the trucks. "Oh dear," groaned Thomas. "Scare the engine," said James. "Fancy jumping at a silly old crane at your very own age," laughed James. Scarloy was feeling very sad. "James was only teasing you," he said. Then Mr. Percival arrived. He was very cross to see what a disaster had been done. "Scarloy," he said, "I would like you to go to the hill farm and pick up a bull and take him here to the wharf." "Yes, sir," said Scarloy. "You're not mad at me, are you?" "Oh, no," said Mr. Percival. "It's a waste of flour. It wasn't your fault." Soon Scarloy had arrived at the farm to pick up the bull. He was still feeling very humiliated of how he had jumped because of the silly old crane. Oh dear, he thought to himself. What a silly engine I am. Meanwhile, Thomas had gone to Knapford Station to report to the Fat Controller that he had finished his job. "Well done, Thomas. By the way, I've got some more jobs for you. You are to take some pipes from Knapford Yards to the wharf, and then you must go to shunt some tar tankers, and to take some trucks to Cronk Fuel Depot, and then you must go to Brandon Docks to pick up some cargo." "Yes, sir," said Thomas. He could see there was a lot to do, wasn't it? Meanwhile, back on the Skarloey Railway, Skarloey was puffing towards the wharf. In front of him were some flooded tracks. Duncan was on the other side. He was too scared to go through the water. "I'm afraid the water's going to put my firebug down," he said. "I'm not a hero," said Skarloey. "If I want to, I'll just go through it. And don't look below," he said. So he had done as he had told Duncan. "Man," said Duncan, "that's it. Just go through it and don't think about the water putting my fire down. Thanks, Skarloey," he said. Then Skarloey came to a bridge. It looked very dangerous. Rusty was on the other side of it. "I'm worried it might collapse," he had told Skarloey. "I'm not a hero," said Skarloey. "If I want to, I'll just shove through and don't look down," he said. And so he had done as he had told Rusty. Rusty could see it, and thanks to that, his fear of the bridge was overcome. "Thanks, Skarloey," he said. Later, Skarloey saw some logs falling from a hill nearby, but the thing is, Rheneas was puffing towards them from the other side. "Rheneas, stop!" said Skarloey. But Rheneas didn't hear him, nor did he do what Skarloey had told him. So Skarloey quickly shoved to the logs just in time. One of the logs had bumped into Skarloey's boiler and had completely dented it. "Skarloey," said Rheneas, "oh my goodness, what has happened to you?" "Oh, Rheneas," said Skarloey, "I'm a very scaredy engine. This morning at the wharf, a silly old crane had dropped some pipes on the ground, and I jumped, and I crashed into my flour truck, and Mr. Percival was very cross, not with me, of course. I'm a very scaredy engine." "No, you're not," said Rheneas. "You just saved me from being bumped by those logs. You're a hero. Rusty and Duncan told me how you helped them overcome a fear from the flooded tracks and the high bridge. You're the bravest engine I know." "Wow," said Skarloey. "Finally somebody had told me so." Later, Skarloey had arrived at the wharf, and he had remembered what Rheneas had told him. Thomas had arrived with his pipes the Fat Controller had told him to deliver there. "Well done, Skarloey," said Mr. Percival. "You finally delivered the bull." Then he looked at Skarloey's dented boiler. "What has happened to you?" he asked. "Oh, sir," said Skarloey, "you won't believe it, but I was puffing near a hill, and some logs fell down, and they were about to bump into Rheneas, but I soon came to save him from that." "Oh my," said Mr. Percival, "you'll have to go to the steamworks, Skarloey. You can't work in this state." "Excuse me, sir," said Thomas. "Perhaps I could take him there, if you won't mind." "Thomas," said Mr. Percival, "good idea. But don't you have some more duties?" "I do, but you wouldn't mind telephoning the Fat Controller and telling him I'm taking Skarloey to the steamworks, would you?" "Certainly not, Thomas," said Mr. Percival. "I'm pretty sure he'll know it." Skarloey was very happy. Soon Skarloey was loaded onto a flatbed. "And remember," said Mr. Percival, "you must take him straight to the steamworks, without a dilly-dallying." "Yes, sir," said Thomas, but Skarloey was sad. "What's the matter, Skarloey?" asked Thomas. "I don't want to go straight to the steamworks," he said. I mean, I do want to go there, but I'd like to see some sights before we'll get there." "Don't worry," said Thomas. "The other day I was taking some sightseers to show them the sights we have on our railway. Yes, said James, not to mention how you left them behind and Bertie had to take them for you. Oh yes, said Thomas, but I'm not going to leave Scarloy behind like I left those people the other day. Make sure you don't, said Scarloy, unless you want to make us laugh by something else like this. Ha ha ha, very funny, said Thomas. I mean, I'm not teasing you about looking like a bee also, are I? Yeah, said James. So Thomas had taken Scarloy to the main line. He wanted to show him as many sights as possible. They passed a farm near Free Track Bend. It's nice, said Scarloy, but we have farms on our railway too. Thomas thought of how he could make Scarloy's trip exciting. Then I'll show you something you guys don't have, said Thomas. Okay, said Scarloy. Soon, Thomas came to Shan Valley on the Peel Godred branch line. He was hoping Scarloy would like it. What do you think of this? He asked. It's very nice, said Scarloy. But on our railway we have valleys too, you know. Don't worry, said Thomas. I'll show you something you have never seen before. Then he had an idea. I know, I'll show you Callan Castle. All right, said Scarloy. Soon Thomas and Scarloy had arrived at Callan Castle. Now what do you think of that? Asked Thomas. It is very nice, said Scarloy, but we guys have castles on our railway too. You do? Asked Thomas. Yes, said Scarloy. Thomas wanted to show Scarloy something else. So he took Scarloy to Gordon's Hill to see what will Scarloy think of this. But then there was trouble. The flatbed coupling was very old and it suddenly snapped, and Scarloy started rolling down Gordon's Hill. Oh no, he groaned. Thomas, you must come back for me. Thomas suddenly realized this. Oh no, he groaned. Soon, the flatbed Scarloy was on had came off the rails, but luckily the flatbed was okay and so was Scarloy. Scarloy was very relieved when Thomas came back for him. Are you all right, Scarloy? Asked Thomas. Yes, I think so. This is all my fault, said Thomas. If I hadn't been a silly engine, if I hadn't only been thinking of what to show you, I mean, this wouldn't have happened. No, it's not, said Scarloy. It is mine. I mean, I told you to show me some sights that you guys have on this railway, and I really enjoyed it. So soon Thomas had pulled Scarloy back on the rails. Gordon was just passing by. He could see Thomas and Scarloy being there. Thomas, what are you doing here with Scarloy? He said. By the way, the Fat Controller is waiting for you at Knapford. He wonders where have you gone. Oh dear, said Thomas. I forgot about my other duties. I've been showing Scarloy the beautiful sights on this railway. After the flatbed had been put back on the rails, Thomas had taken Scarloy to Norramby Beach. You guys don't have beaches on your railway, do you? No, we don't, said Scarloy. He then looked at all the people who were enjoying a lovely day. Wow, said Scarloy, I've never seen such thing. Yeah, said Thomas. But he knew there was no time for dilly-dallying, so he quickly had taken Scarloy to the steamworks. Thomas knew he had been late, and that the Fat Controller might be cross with him. Meanwhile, the Fat Controller was very impatient. He had told Thomas about the other duties, and because Thomas hadn't been returning, the Fat Controller had decided to find another engine that was not busy at the moment, and the engine was Toby. Toby, he said, I wanted Thomas to shunt some tar tankers and to take some trucks to Kronk Fuel Depot and to pick up some cargo from Brandon Docks. I would like you to do it for him because he's gone somewhere. Yes, sir, said Toby, but he was a little upset. Today he wanted to go to Farmer McCall's farm to see some animals in there. Oh dear, said Toby. I hope somebody will do some of my duties for me if I ask them. When Toby had arrived at the depot with the tar wagons, he met Mavis there. Maybe Mavis could help me, he wondered. Hi, Mavis, he said. Say, you wouldn't mind shunting these trucks for me, would you? I'm afraid not, said Mavis. I'm too busy at the moment. That does it, said Toby. Meanwhile, Thomas had returned to Knapford Station, where the Fat Controller was waiting for him, and he was very strict with him. Thomas, the tank engine! He boomed severely. Where on earth have you been? I'm sorry, sir. I took Scarloy to the steamworks because he had broken down. I know about that, but what took you so long? Thomas had to tell him the truth. I showed him the sights on the Northwestern Railway, he said. Oh, that's why, said the Fat Controller. But you should never have done that without my permission, now should you? Thomas was very ashamed. Tell you what, Thomas, said the Fat Controller, Henry has broken down on the main line. I would like you to pick up Annie and Clarabelle and take Henry's passengers here for him, now that he can't go anywhere. Yes, sir, said Thomas. Later, Thomas and Toby met. Say, Thomas, said Toby, would you mind doing one of the jobs for me? Sorry, I can't, said Thomas. I need to go now. I am very busy, he said. I wonder what is he busy with, wondered Toby. I thought he was supposed to do the 3 jobs I am supposed to be doing for him. And now Thomas is finally here. I don't get it. After Toby had done 2 of the 3 jobs, he had arrived at Brandon Docks to do the 3rd one. Salty was there. Oh, hello, Salty, said Toby. Say, you wouldn't mind helping me, would you? I'm afraid I'm too busy now, me hearty, said Salty. I'd like to help, but I can't now, you see. That does it, said Toby. Oh well, I guess I'll have to do it on my own then. What do you want here? Asked Cranky. I've come to pick up the load, said Toby. Oh, you mean the one that was supposed to arrive now? The ship has been delayed and fast. It will not be here until tomorrow morning. That means I don't need to do this one, said Tommy. He was very relieved, but that meant he had been traveling all the way to Brandon Docks only to find out he didn't have to. AKA for nothing, as you know it. Later, Toby had met Henry on the main line. Henry looked ill, and he was. What's the matter with you? He asked. I was broken down, said Henry, but I am fine now. If you're fine now, then why don't you go anywhere? My driver and fireman had gone to a restaurant nearby because they were hungry, replied Henry. Thomas had come here to pick up my passengers. Mavis had brought me my special coal, and Salty had brought me my new piston rods. Toby now understood it. That was why Salty, Mavis, and Thomas were too busy to help him, because they were already helping Henry. Is there anything I can do for you, Henry? Asked Toby. Someone needs to move my coaches to Knapford Station, but after they do that, so I'll tell my driver and fireman when they come back. Perhaps I could, said Tommy. Thank you, Tommy, said Henry. I thought But I thought you wanted to go to Farmer McCall's farm this afternoon. Yeah, said Toby, but I don't mind. I was pulling express coaches the other day, so I think I'll be fine. And he was. Toby was coupled to Henry's coaches, and even though they were heavy, he normally managed to pull them. Wow, he said, maybe helping a friend is better than afternoon off any day. Soon Toby had arrived at Knapford Station. The Fat Controller was there. Oh, Toby, he said, I was told about the ship that was meant to sail to Brandon Docks. Yes, I was told too, said Toby. Frankie told me that I didn't need to do the front jump. That's right, said the Fat Controller. By the way, I never knew you were strong enough to pull express coaches. I am so glad you brought them here for Henry. Yes, sir, said Toby. But, sir, this isn't the first time I'm pulling the express coaches. It isn't? No, sir, said Toby. I was pulling them once, not long ago, when you had lost your voice and Percy was in charge of this railway. Why? Asked the Fat Controller. I never wanted any engine to pull Gordon's coaches, did I? Percy had made a mistake, explained Toby. He thought I was supposed to pull Gordon's express. And then Toby had told the Fat Controller about how Percy had muddled running the railway. The Fat Controller was very cross with Percy. I see now. Well, as a punishment, he will not be taking his mail. I will give him some other duties, and his mail will be pulled by Thomas, he said. Meanwhile, on the Scarloy Railway, after Scarloy had gone to the steamworks to be repaired, Mr. Percival needed an engine to do his job. Scarloy was meant to take the clock tower's bell from the transfer yard to the polishers to have it polished. It was meant to be back the very next day for a market to start. Mr. Percival had chosen Duncan to pick up the clock tower's bell. Duncan was enjoying it. When he came to his favorite part of the railway, where the tracks were bumpy and thus his wheels rattled and shook, he couldn't help but rattled on it going back to and from. When Renes came to him, he was mad at him. Duncan, stop it, he said severely. You know you're not supposed to do that. But I'm enjoying it, said Duncan. Then don't be, said Renes. You will be late. No, I won't, said Duncan. But Renes was right. Duncan was going to be late if he kept on doing this all the time. Man, said Renes, I wish Scarloy was back. I heard that, said Duncan. But I do, said Renes, because unlike you, he wouldn't do what you're doing here, having purposely going to and from on the bumpy track. At last Duncan had arrived at the transfer yard. The manager was very cross with him. Duncan, he said, where on earth have you been? You were supposed to be here. Listen, you are to take this bell to the polishers, but please, no dilly-dallying, will you? Yes, sir, said Duncan. He was looking forward to coming to the bumpy tracks on the railway. He loved it when his wheels rattled and shook. After the bell had been loaded on his flatbed, Duncan left the transfer yard. Despite the manager's warning, Duncan wouldn't listen. He was very looking forward, as I say, to having his wheels rattling and shaking. Soon he came past Sir Handel. Slow down, said Sir Handel, or you're going to have a crash with your load. No, I won't, said Rheneas. Man, said Sir Handel, I do hope Scarloy gets mended soon. I mean, he wouldn't be such a rough and reckless engine unlike Duncan. I heard that, said Duncan. But it's true, said Sir Handel. You're going to have an accident with it if you keep on doing this. No, I'm not, said Duncan. But Sir Handel was right. When Duncan came to a bend, he wasn't careful, and then it happened. The bell rolled off his flatbed and started falling down. Oh dear, groaned Duncan. Sir Handel was right. Why didn't I listen to him? Driver, you think you could go off my cab and see where you can find the bell? No, Duncan, said his driver. You have lost it, so you will have to find a way to find it. Duncan thought for a moment. Then he remembered there were rails on the bottom of the hill. The bell had fallen off. Maybe I'll find it there, he thought, and he did. The bell had landed on a branch of a tree. Duncan heard the sound of the bell, and the closer he went to it, the more he heard it. Man, I can't believe I found it, he said. He came right under the bell, and then the branch suddenly broke, and the bell had landed on Duncan's flatbed. Hooray! Said Duncan. I caught it! Then Duncan continued his journey to the polishers. I'm so glad I did it, he said. I can't believe I did it. The next morning, after the bell had been polished, Duncan collected it, but this time he wasn't careless. He was careful now not to drop it again. And Mr. Percival was pleased with him. Well done, Duncan, he said. Duncan could not believe it. Later that day, Percy was at Tidmouth shed, and he was looking sad. The Fat Controller had told him off for running his railway the way he did. It wasn't my fault, he groaned. Why is Thomas going to be taking my mail? I wonder who will be running his branch line while while he's pulling my mail, he wondered. Later that day, the Fat Controller was at Knapford Station with Thomas. Thomas, he said, meet Rosie. She will be running your branch line while you will be doing Percy's jobs. Hello, said Thomas. I'm Thomas. Nice to meet you, said Rosie. You must be the engine I'll be running the branch line off. Yeah, said Thomas. By the way, Thomas, the Fat Controller went on, as you know, today is Alice's birthday. I would like you to deliver her some birthday presents and cards. They're waiting for you at Maron Station. Yes, sir, said Thomas. But first, added the Fat Controller, as you know, Scarloy has already been fixed. I want you to go to the steamworks to pick him and take him to the wharf. Yes, sir, said Thomas. And another thing, added the Fat Controller. Next time you're going to want to take someone on a trip, please ask me first, so that I could know, because I was worried about where have you gone, Thomas. Oh yes, sir, said Thomas. Rosie had never heard of Alice. Excuse me, sir, she said. Yes, Rosie? Asked the Fat Controller before he wanted to go to his office. Who is Alice? I have never heard of her. Alice is a friend of mine, said Thomas. It's a little girl who lives on a farm near Alfstead branch line. That's right, said the Fat Controller, and Thomas is going to deliver the birthday mail to her. But I thought Percy usually does that, said Rosie. I mean, I have already met Percy, and he told me he was the engine responsible for delivering the mail. He usually does, said the Fat Controller, but now I have taken his mail duties off as a punishment, and instead Thomas will be delivering it for him. Why? Asked Rosie. Because, said the Fat Controller, the other day when I couldn't speak, Percy was to run this railway for me, but he got the things a little bit messed up, so for that. I see, said Rosie.